Thank you, Manila Times, for having me as one of your speakers in today's conference. Of course, I will be coming purely from the lens and perspective of political PR. Now, relating this to the theme of the forum, which is PR's contribution to nation building, it is my hope that the practice and discipline of PR may be leveled up and raised to a higher standard, or at least evolve to a political PR 2.0 beyond 2022. As a political PR practitioner, our method really revolves around what we call a campaign architecture or a 4M. So this is the man, the message, the machinery. Unfortunately, the money aspect is also an important part of running a campaign. And all of this will ultimately result in mapping out a strategy for a candidate. Political PR and communications will always involve the AAA platform. However, my suggestion as to my at least my hope again, I don't want to overuse the term, but my hope is that political PR and communications, if it is to contribute to nation building, should have a well balanced structure and percentages as far as a AAA platform is concerned. What are these three AAA platform? These three sides to it. It's avert, attack, and applaud. There are two rules of applause. First is have one item carry on. Don't try to be everything. No matter how much information you offer, people will only remember one thing. This is the rule of political PR and communications. It's what we call a bed of nails versus one nail. So if you lie down on a bed of 100 nails, it will not penetrate your skin. So hindi yan tatagos, ika nga sa Filipino. Versus one nail, when you lie down, it will definitely puncture and it will make a mark. So that's the rule of applause when talking about political PR and communications. Now the challenge is to turn this one nail, and there's an asterisk on that nail, into a catchphrase or campaignable that reinforces the gut or the head and the heart man quadrant. Hopefully, if we are to contribute to nation building as communicators and as PR, political PR professionals, uh, perhaps make that one nail more substantial than a dance or a song or a signature look or uh, or that one nail is you look like a celebrity. Let's turn that one message, one item carry on into something that is attractive that will still reinforce the gut, heart, head, man quadrant. So my hope for political PR 2.0 moving forward beyond 2022, yung tinatawag nating lunchbox, sana ang messaging natin lunchbox, hindi lobo. What is a lobo? It's a big, bright, uh, colorful thing that will attract the eyes, that will be appealing to many, even from afar. But ultimately, it's a big bloat of air. There's nothing substantial inside it. So if political PR is to contribute to nation building, I'm hoping that even in our applause communications efforts, we can follow the lunchbox model wherein the voters can really open that lunchbox and sift through it and have many dimensions to your messaging and really understand how it relates to them rather than just a big lobo or balloon. Now, the second rule of applause is to uphold SIDMIT, what I call SIDMIT. Now, if we did follow this SIDMIT, I think it would have a substantial effect. Well, maybe not substantial, but at least it would make a dent towards nation building. What is SIDMIT? Let's focus on what our candidates are superlative in. You must promise me something that you are the very best at. Having said that, this superlative has to be important. Your superlative promise has to be something that matters to me. In the past, we've had candidates promise, abstracts like sovereignty or decency or integrity. It turns out sadly that It's not an order of attribute preference, which is a sad electoral reality. It's something that the voters just don't understand, number one, or sometimes just don't really value. So your submit communications, it has to be important. It also has to be believable. There has to be a unique, plausible reason why you claim the above. That makes logical sense. So, for example, um, if candidate A did not finish their education, for example, or did not finish schooling, it would hardly be believable if suddenly this candidate is championing himself or herself as the education choice. So it has to be believable. Ideally, it should also be memorable to trigger an AIM response. What is this AIM response? It is alert, inspire, and motivate. The rule of communications, at least from a campaign perspective, is either you are alerting the voter, if you don't vote for me, something bad will happen, or we will plummet into a period of regression. So that's an alert response. If you don't vote for me, magiging narco state ang buong Pilipinas. If you don't vote for me, drug lords ang magiging mga pinuno ng ating bansa. So that's an alert response. I is inspire, wherein you are latching onto something greater than you. Love, so love of country, love of family, unity, yes, katapatan, for example, angat buhay, and so on and so forth. M is motivate, which is a short-term gain for voting for that candidate. So, for example, if you vote for me, I'm going to give you a house. So, ideally, it should link to or trigger an AIM response. Finally, and most importantly, just tracking it back to the theme of our forum, to raise the bar to make political PR 2.0 beyond 2022, it has to be T or tangible. Let's make sure that as political communicators, we are packaging our candidates and showing their performance that is consistent. Let's, ultimately, political PR professionals or campaign strategists like myself will always follow the flower arrangement rule. Nothing bad about that. We get the colorful and vibrant flowers to surround the dry and wilted ones so that they're not seen. That's our job, right? So that will still be observed. There's really nothing wrong with that. It is the practice. It is a reality of our profession, wherein we get the more attractive aspects of a candidate in order to, well, I don't want to say disguise, that would be very disingenuous, but in order to take attention away from the less than attractive attributes of a candidate. So we follow that flower arrangement rule. However, if we're talking about 2.0 and raising the bar, we should do two things. Number one, let's avoid battle fatigue. What happens to many candidates is that every issue thrown against them, they meet head on and fight. I'll talk about that a little bit when I get to the attack aspect. But they engage in every battle. So what happens is communications between candidates is nothing but a back and forth of essentially two candidates arguing in public, right? Throwing one accusation after the other. So let's avoid battle fatigue. Hopefully, political PR professionals can avoid battle fatigue in the future. And most importantly, this is a tough call, I know, and perhaps idealistic, but my hope is that political PR 2.0, if we are to raise the bar, let's apply this rule called house lights and not spotlight. Because what happens most of the time when a candidate gets an issue thrown against him or her, what they will do is they will engage in whataboutism. Oh yeah? You're accusing me of corruption? Well, what about this guy? Well, what about you? What about this? And that's their way of shifting the spotlight away from them. Hopefully, beyond 2022, we can focus on house lights, meaning to say not shifting a spotlight away, but turning on house lights and giving the situation context in a larger setting. Attacking still is part of the game, but for us to contribute to nation building, political campaign strategists, the first rule And perhaps the most important rule, if you have one takeaway from this presentation, I'm hoping it is this. Let's stop it with fake news. No more fake news. If this very big ill and cancer of our profession can be finally extracted from political public relations and from public relations in general, I think it would really help contribute to nation building. No fake news. I think attacking your opponents in one shape or form will always be there, but let's learn to inquire instead of invent. It's very artful the way we have our candidates hang a negative, and we form a mob. But if we're to hang a negative on our opponents and form a mob against them, this always has to be based on facts. Again, I'm being a realist here and saying that it will always, I think, in one way, shape, or form, communications attacks will always be present in the discipline in political PR. But mastering the art of hanging a negative. For example, in an interview, suddenly your candidate will say, "Well, at least ako walang kaso sa ombudsman." So that's hanging a negative. And what I mean by forming a mob is, for example, if you know that your opponent in the past, for example, wrote legislation that is detrimental to the transport sector, for instance, then you will engage these transport sector leaders and say, "Oh my goodness, look at this guy. Oh. Do you remember the time when this guy wrote legislation that greatly affected your profession?" You are It's an artful way to hang a negative and to quote, I know it's a terrible term, but form a mob against your opponent. But this must always be based on facts. As political public relations communicators, we are we should be sworn to always base whatever communication strategies we have on facts.